Let me give you one of the most important distinctions you can understand when dealing with an avoidant person. Sometimes, the problem is not that you love them. The problem is that the intensity of the love can activate something inside them that they have spent years learning to protect. Think about what happens when you experience something emotionally powerful. If you have learned that closeness is safe, intimacy can feel nourishing, you move toward it, you communicate, you allow yourself to be seen. But if someone has learned, consciously or unconsciously, that emotional closeness comes with pressure, disappointment, obligation, or the loss of independence, intimacy can produce a completely different response. They may want connection and simultaneously fear what connection demands from them. That is the paradox. An avoidant person can genuinely enjoy your attention, miss you when you're gone, feel deeply connected to you, and still become uncomfortable when the relationship starts becoming emotionally intense. This is why their behavior can appear contradictory. One moment they're warm, engaged, affectionate, and present, then suddenly they become distant, quiet, or difficult to reach. And if you misunderstand what is happening, you may make the situation worse. You think, they're pulling away, so I need to show them more love, so you text more. You explain more. You reassure them more. You ask more questions. You try to eliminate every possible doubt. You think that if they can just understand how deeply you care, they'll finally feel safe enough to come closer. But here's the psychological problem. What you experience as reassurance, they may experience as pressure. What you experience as devotion, they may experience as expectation. What you experience as emotional availability, they may experience as the loss of breathing room. And when their internal sense of freedom begins to disappear, distance can feel like the only way to recover it. This doesn't mean you should become cold. It doesn't mean you should punish them. And it certainly doesn't mean you should manipulate them by pretending not to care. It means you need to understand that love and emotional pressure are not the same thing. You can love someone profoundly without constantly monitoring the relationship. You can care about their feelings without making their feelings responsible for your happiness. You can be available without becoming endlessly available. That's a profound shift because healthy love is not measured by how much of yourself you can sacrifice. It's measured by whether you can remain yourself while loving another person. This is where many people lose their power. They begin making the relationship the center of their emotional universe. If the avoidant responds, they feel valuable. If the avoidant becomes distant, they feel rejected. If the avoidant returns, they feel hopeful again. Their emotional state becomes controlled by another person's behavior. And that's not love at its highest level. That's emotional dependence. The deeper lesson is that you cannot create security inside another person by becoming increasingly insecure yourself. You cannot convince someone to feel safe by abandoning your own stability. You cannot force intimacy by increasing intensity. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is create enough space for both people to breathe, because space reveals something that pressure conceals. It reveals choice. When you stop trying to control every outcome, you get information. You discover whether they move toward you voluntarily. You discover whether they initiate. You discover whether they can communicate. You discover whether they are capable of meeting you emotionally rather than simply receiving what you give, and that information is priceless. Because your goal should never be to convince someone to love you. Your goal should be to build a relationship where love can exist without either person having to abandon themselves. So if you're loving an avoidant person right now, don't ask yourself, how can I love them harder? Ask yourself a better question. How can I love them deeply while still honoring my own identity, boundaries, and emotional stability? And that question changes everything. Because the moment you stop measuring love by how much you give, you begin measuring it by the quality of the connection you are both capable of creating. Asterisk, asterisk, love deeply, but never disappear inside the person you love. Asterisk, asterisk. Now, once you understand that emotional intensity can sometimes trigger an avoidant person's instinct to create distance, you have to confront the next uncomfortable truth. What you do after they pull away can determine whether the cycle becomes stronger or finally begins to break. Because this is where people lose themselves. They feel the other person becoming distant, and fear immediately takes over. The mind starts creating stories. What did I do wrong? Are they losing interest? Should I text them again? Maybe I need to explain myself better. And suddenly, instead of responding to the situation, you're reacting to your fear of the situation. So you reach out, you send another message, then another. You ask for reassurance. You explain your intentions. You tell them how much you care. You try to make the emotional distance disappear as quickly as possible. And underneath all of it is one powerful belief. If I can just get close enough, I can make this relationship feel secure again. But here's what you need to understand psychologically. When someone has an avoidant pattern, increased pursuit can sometimes intensify their desire for distance. The more pressure they perceive, the more valuable space becomes to them. Your pursuit and their withdrawal then begin feeding each other. You chase because they retreat. They retreat because you chase. You become more anxious because they retreat further. They feel more pressure because your anxiety increases. And now you've created a system where both people are responding to each other's nervous systems instead of consciously choosing how to relate. This is why chasing is so dangerous, not because reaching out is inherently wrong, but because repeated pursuit can teach both people that distance must always be followed by pursuit. The avoidant learns, if I pull away, they'll come after me. And the anxious partner learns, if they pull away, I must chase them to restore connection. Neither person gets the opportunity to develop a healthier pattern. So what do you do instead? You pause. Not as a game, not as punishment, not to make them jealous, and certainly not because you're pretending you don't care. You pause because you refuse to allow fear to dictate your behavior. That's emotional strength. There is a profound difference between giving someone space and abandoning the relationship. Giving space says, I respect your need to process, and I also respect myself enough not to beg for access to you. That is completely different from silent treatment or manipulation. You are not trying to make them suffer, you are allowing reality to speak. And reality is incredibly informative when you stop interfering with it. If you stop chasing, what happens? Do they come back and initiate? Do they ask about you? Do they make an effort? Do they communicate what happened? Do they demonstrate that they value the connection? Or does the relationship simply disappear because you were the only person carrying it? Those answers may hurt, but they are valuable, because sometimes your pursuit has been hiding the truth. You've been maintaining the relationship through effort that should have been shared. You've been providing communication that should have been mutual. You've been creating closeness that the other person was not actively helping to create. And eventually, you have to ask yourself a powerful question. Am I building a relationship with this person, or am I constantly trying to rescue the relationship from their withdrawal? That question can wake you up. Because love should require effort, but it should not require you to constantly convince another person to participate. You can communicate your feelings clearly, you can express what you want, you can make your intentions known. But after that, you have to leave room for the other person to choose. Choice is essential. If someone comes toward you only because you chased them until they had no emotional room left, you haven't created security, you've created compliance. And compliance is not intimacy. Real intimacy requires two people who freely choose each other. So the next time an avoidant pulls away, resist the reflex to immediately pursue. Take a breath. Return your attention to your own life. Let your emotions settle before you act. Ask yourself what response reflects your values rather than your fear. Because your greatest power in relationships is not your ability to make someone stay. It is your ability to remain whole whether they stay or go. Asterisk, asterisk. Stop chasing clarity from someone who is creating confusion. Let their actions become the answer. Asterisk, asterisk. And once you stop participating in that cycle of chasing and withdrawing, something fascinating can happen. Your absence can create a kind of clarity that your constant presence never could. Now understand this carefully. This is not about playing games. It is not about disappearing to manipulate someone into missing you. It is not about creating jealousy, withholding affection, or trying to control another person's emotions. It's about stepping back from over-functioning. Because when you're always there, always available, always initiating, always checking in, always trying to repair the connection, the other person may never have to confront what your presence actually means to them. They simply experience access to you, and access can become invisible. Think about something you use every day. When it is constantly available, you rarely stop to appreciate its value. But when it is suddenly absent, your mind notices the difference. Psychologically, absence creates contrast. It interrupts the pattern. It forces awareness. That can happen in relationships too. When an avoidant person has become accustomed to your attention, your messages, your emotional availability, and your constant attempts to maintain connection, they may not consciously recognize how much of the relationship has been supported by your effort. Then you step back, not dramatically, not with anger, not with a long announcement about how disappointed you are. You simply stop doing what was never your responsibility to do alone. And now they have space to experience the relationship from a different perspective. They may begin wondering where you are. They may notice that your name isn't appearing on their phone. They may remember conversations, moments, laughter, or emotional experiences that they previously took for granted. But more importantly, they may finally have enough psychological space to distinguish between their fear of intimacy and their actual feelings for you. That's important because avoidant patterns often involve an internal conflict. I want connection, but I don't want to feel trapped by connection. When you're constantly pursuing, they may focus almost entirely on the second part, the fear. When you step back, the pressure decreases. And when the pressure decreases, they may have an opportunity to notice the first part, the desire for connection. This is why absence can sometimes reveal feelings that proximity was masking. But here's where you need maturity. Do not turn this into a strategy for making someone come back. If you say, I'm going to disappear for 10 days because then they'll miss me, you're still emotionally controlled by them. You're still waiting, you're still monitoring, you're still trying to produce a specific outcome. That's not freedom. True emotional freedom sounds different. It says, I'm going to step back because I refuse to chase someone who isn't meeting me halfway. If they return with genuine effort, I'll evaluate that. If they don't, I will continue moving forward. That's strength. And there is another important truth here. Sometimes absence doesn't make someone return. Sometimes absence simply reveals that they were never prepared to participate in the relationship at the level you needed. And that revelation is not failure. That is information. You don't need someone to miss you in order for your relationship to have been meaningful. You don't need someone to regret losing you in order for you to know your value. Your worth does not increase because someone finally recognizes it. Your worth was already there. The purpose of stepping back is not to make another person feel your absence. The purpose is to stop abandoning yourself in order to maintain their presence. And when you do that, you create something far more powerful than attraction. You create self-respect. You begin filling your time with your own goals again. You reconnect with friends. You pursue your work. You take care of your body. You develop your interests. You stop checking your phone every few minutes. You stop analyzing every sentence they sent 3 days ago. Your world becomes bigger again. And ironically, that is often when you become more attractive, not because you're pretending to be unavailable, but because you're no longer emotionally dependent on someone else's availability. You become grounded. You become centered. You become capable of loving without grasping. And if the avoidant person returns, you don't automatically rush back into the old dynamic. You observe. You ask, has anything actually changed? Because words are easy. Temporary longing is easy. Missing someone is easy. Real change is demonstrated through consistent behavior. Does this person initiate? Do they communicate? Do they respect your needs? Can they tolerate closeness without repeatedly disappearing? Are they willing to build something mutual? Those are the questions that matter. So never confuse someone missing you with someone being ready for you. Someone can miss your presence and still be incapable of sustaining a healthy relationship. That's why your goal isn't to become unforgettable. Your goal is to become so secure within yourself that you no longer need someone else's reaction to validate your importance. If your absence makes them recognize your value, let that be their realization. But if your absence simply gives you the clarity to recognize your own value, that may be the greater victory. Asterisk, asterisk, step back not to make them miss you, but to make sure you never lose yourself trying to be remembered. Asterisk, asterisk. And this brings us to the deepest point of all. After you understand emotional intensity, after you stop feeding the chase and withdraw cycle, and after you learn how space can reveal what is actually there, you have to make one final shift. Stop making the goal getting the avoidant to chase you. Because if your entire emotional strategy is designed around making another person come back, you are still giving them control over your emotional life. You may have stopped texting them, but you're still thinking about them every 5 minutes. You may have gone silent, but you're still checking whether they viewed your story. You may have decided not to chase, but internally you're still asking, when will they finally realize what they lost? That isn't emotional freedom. That's waiting with a different posture. Real power begins when your objective changes. Your objective is no longer to make someone choose you. Your objective is to become the kind of person who chooses themselves first, and then allows relationships to be built from that foundation. There is a profound philosophical principle here. You cannot control another person's choice, but you can control the standard by which you participate. You can decide what kind of communication you accept. You can decide how much inconsistency you are willing to tolerate. You can decide whether someone's actions match their words. You can decide whether a relationship gives you peace or repeatedly forces you into confusion. And once you understand that, you stop negotiating against yourself. You stop saying, maybe if I become easier, they'll stay. Maybe if I ask for less, they'll feel comfortable. Maybe if I never express my needs, they won't feel pressured. But listen carefully. If you have to become smaller to keep someone close, you haven't created intimacy. You've created self-abandonment. Healthy love doesn't require you to erase your needs so another person can remain comfortable. It requires two people who are willing to understand each other's needs and find a way to meet them without destroying themselves. That's why becoming emotionally unshakable is so important. Being emotionally unshakable doesn't mean you don't care. It means you care without losing your center. You can miss someone without contacting them impulsively. You can love someone without accepting poor treatment. You can hope for reconciliation without putting your entire life on pause. You can remain open to someone returning without promising them immediate access to you. That's emotional maturity. And here's where your standards become more important than your feelings. Your feelings might say, I want them. Your standards need to ask, can they actually build something healthy with me? Those are two completely different questions. You can deeply desire someone who is not capable of giving you the relationship you deserve. You can have chemistry with someone who lacks consistency. You can feel connected to someone who isn't emotionally available. You can miss someone who isn't good for your future. Emotion tells you what you feel. Wisdom asks what you should do with those feelings. That distinction can save you years. So if an avoidant comes back, don't immediately celebrate the return as proof that everything has changed. Observe. Has their communication changed? Has their consistency changed? Are they taking responsibility for their behavior? Are they willing to have difficult conversations? Can they tolerate emotional closeness without repeatedly disappearing? Are they actually building trust, or are they simply responding to the discomfort of losing access to you? Those questions protect you from confusing temporary emotion with genuine transformation, because anyone can miss you, anyone can feel lonely, anyone can reach out at midnight and say, I've been thinking about you. But building a relationship requires something much greater than missing someone. It requires consistency. It requires accountability. It requires emotional courage. It requires two people willing to tolerate discomfort rather than escaping from it. And you cannot do that work for another person. You can invite someone into a healthier relationship, but you cannot drag them into emotional maturity. You can communicate clearly, but you cannot communicate for two people. You can love deeply, but you cannot love someone into becoming ready. This is why your greatest victory isn't getting the avoidant to chase you. Your greatest victory is reaching the point where whether they chase you or not, you remain grounded. You don't need their attention to feel valuable. You don't need their return to feel complete. You don't need their regret to prove that you mattered. You know who you are. And from that position, something beautiful happens. If they come back, you can evaluate the relationship with clarity instead of desperation. If they don't, you can continue forward without believing that their absence has reduced your worth. That's freedom. So don't build your life around the question, how do I make them come back? Build it around a much more powerful question, who do I need to become so that I never abandon myself again? Because when you answer that question, the entire dynamic changes. Don't make your goal to be chosen by them. Make your goal to become someone who chooses wisely. Asterisk, asterisk.